The day she walked back into his life, he dropped the coffee mug he was holding, and it shattered across the kitchen floor like the past he had tried so hard to bury. He hadn't seen her in 8 years. 8 long, stubborn, regret-filled years. And now she stood at his front door in the fading light of evening, older, thinner, carrying a worn leather bag in one hand and a truth in her eyes that made his chest tighten before she even spoke. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in the idea that no mistake is too big to fix, take a moment right now to like this video, share it, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel, Lonely Dad Strong Heart. Stories like this remind us that even broken chapters can lead to beautiful endings. Armin had always been known as a strong man. After his wife died in a car accident, leaving him alone with a 5-year-old daughter, he became both mother and father overnight. He learned how to braid hair by watching online tutorials late at night. He learned how to cook tiny heart-shaped pancakes before school. He learned how to sit outside the bathroom door when his daughter cried because she missed her mother. But what he never learned was how to forgive himself for being constantly exhausted, constantly angry at the world, constantly afraid of losing the only family he had left. Back then, when everything was falling apart, she had worked for him. Her name was Mira. She had been his assistant at the small architectural firm he built from scratch. She was young, bright, and far more patient than he deserved. She handled clients when he snapped at them. She organized deadlines when he forgot meetings. She even stayed late when he had to rush home because his daughter had a fever. She became the quiet glue that held his collapsing professional life together. But grief has a way of twisting good men into strangers. One afternoon, after losing an important contract worth more than he could afford to lose, Armin exploded. The client had backed out because of a miscommunication in the proposal. The error was small, but it was costly. And instead of looking at his own oversight, he looked at Mira. He accused her of negligence. He said she had become careless. He said he couldn't trust her anymore. He didn't shout, but his words were sharp enough to cut. He saw her eyes fill with tears, saw her lips tremble as she tried to explain, but he didn't let her finish. He told her to pack her things. He told her not to come back. She left quietly that day, carrying a small box with her desk plant and a framed photograph of the office team. He watched her walk out, convincing himself that he had done the right thing. Convincing himself that leadership required toughness. Convincing himself that emotions were weaknesses he could not afford. But that night, when he tucked his daughter into bed and sat alone in the dark living room, he replayed the scene in his mind. And for the first time, he felt something that had nothing to do with grief. Shame. Years passed. His business survived, but it never truly flourished the way it once had. He worked harder, longer hours. His daughter, Alina, grew into a thoughtful, sensitive teenager. She inherited her mother's gentle eyes and her father's quiet resilience. She would sometimes watch him when he thought she wasn't looking, as if she could see the weight he carried inside his chest. Armin never spoke of Mira again. But sometimes, when he struggled with a complicated project or faced a difficult client, he remembered how effortlessly she had handled those situations. He remembered her calm voice. He remembered the loyalty he had thrown away. And then, on an ordinary Thursday evening, the doorbell rang. Alina was upstairs studying. Armin opened the door, absent-mindedly, expecting a delivery or a neighbor. Instead, he found himself staring at a ghost from his past. Mira stood there, her hair tied back, her face marked by time but still carrying that same quiet strength. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them felt heavy with unsaid apologies and unanswered questions. He noticed something else then. Standing slightly behind her was a young boy, about 7 years old, clutching the strap of her bag. The boy's eyes were large and uncertain. And something about them made Armin's breath hitch. They were his eyes. The same dark brown. The same slight curve at the corners. His mind began racing through impossible calculations. The years. The timing. The one conference trip where he and Mira had stayed late finishing a proposal, where grief and loneliness had blurred boundaries they never meant to cross. It had been a single night. A mistake born from shared sorrow. They never spoke of it again. They buried it under professionalism and distance. He had fired her just weeks later. She stepped inside slowly, as if unsure whether she was welcome. The boy stayed close to her side. Mira finally spoke, her voice steady but heavy. She told him she hadn't come for revenge. She hadn't come for money. She had come because she could no longer carry the truth alone. The boy's name was Arav. He was his son. The words didn't feel real. They echoed in Armin's ears, but his heart refused to process them. He looked at the boy again, searching for denial, for proof that this was some misunderstanding. But the resemblance was undeniable. Mira explained that she had found out she was pregnant shortly after losing her job. She had tried to call him, but his number had changed. She had written an email, but never received a reply. Later she learned that he had switched offices and updated all contact details. She took his silence as rejection. So she left the city. She raised Arav alone. She worked 2 jobs. She faced whispers and judgment. She endured nights when her son asked about his father, and she had no answer that didn't hurt. She had every reason to hate Armin. But she didn't. Because in her heart, she knew he had been a broken man back then. She had not come to demand anything. Arav had recently developed a medical condition that required a detailed family medical history. She realized she could not keep the truth from him any longer. He deserved to know where he came from. And Armin deserved to know he had a son. The room felt smaller as the weight of her words settled in. Upstairs, Alina came down the stairs, curious about the unfamiliar voices. She froze when she saw the scene, her father pale and speechless, a woman she didn't recognize, and a small boy staring at the floor. Armin struggled to explain, but Mira gently filled in the gaps. Alina listened quietly, her expression unreadable. It could have been a moment of anger. It could have been resentment. But instead, something surprising happened. Alina walked toward Arav and knelt down so she was at his eye level. She offered him a soft smile and asked if he liked drawing. The boy nodded shyly. She took his hand and led him to the living room table, pulling out her sketchbook. In that simple act, Armin saw what true strength looked like. Not denial. Not pride. Acceptance. The weeks that followed were messy and uncertain. Armin insisted on a paternity test, not because he doubted Mira, but because he needed certainty before rebuilding his entire world. When the results confirmed what his heart already knew, he sat alone in his car for a long time, gripping the steering wheel, letting tears fall freely for the first time in years. He had missed 7 years of his son's life. 7 birthdays. 7 first days of school. 7 years of bedtime stories he never read. The guilt was crushing. But Mira did not ask him to drown in it. She asked him to show up. And he did. He started small. Weekend visits. Trips to the park. Awkward conversations where Arav studied him carefully, as if trying to decide whether this new figure in his life could be trusted. Armin didn't try to buy his affection. He simply sat beside him, helped him with homework, listened to his stories about school. Slowly, walls began to fall. Alina, surprisingly, became the bridge between them all. She welcomed her half-brother without hesitation, as if she had always wanted a sibling. She teased her father when he overreacted to minor things. She encouraged Mira to stay for dinner. And through it all, Armin began to see Mira differently. Not as the assistant he had fired. Not as the woman tied to a painful memory. But as someone who had carried an unimaginable burden with dignity. Someone who had protected his child without asking for recognition. One evening, after Arav had fallen asleep on the couch and Alina was upstairs, Armin sat across from Mira at the kitchen table. The silence between them was no longer heavy with anger. It was filled with shared history. He finally apologized, not just for firing her, but for the arrogance, the blindness, the way he let grief turn him into someone unkind. Mira listened quietly, and then she forgave him. Not dramatically. Not with grand gestures. Just softly. Life didn't transform overnight. They faced challenges. There were legal matters to settle. There were difficult conversations about custody and responsibility. There were moments when old wounds resurfaced. But this time, they faced them together. Armin learned that strength was not about control. It was about humility. It was about admitting when you were wrong and choosing to do better. Months later, as he stood in the audience at Arav's school event, watching both his children on stage, Alina guiding her younger brother during a performance, he felt something he hadn't felt since before his wife died. Peace. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of purpose. He realized that losing his wife had shattered him, but it had not destroyed his ability to love. Firing Mira had been one of his greatest mistakes. Yet even that mistake had led to a second chance he never expected. Sometimes life returns what you lost, not in the same form, not at the same time, but in a way that forces you to grow. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of someone you need to forgive or a truth you've been afraid to face, please take a moment to like, share, and comment. Your engagement helps stories like this reach the people who need them most. And before this story ends, I want to ask you something special. Comment below with one word, second chance, if you believe no one is beyond redemption. Because in the end, the single dad who once let his anger cost him everything learned that love, when given another opportunity, can rebuild what pride once destroyed. And sometimes, the most unexpected knock on the door is not there to haunt you. It's there to heal you.